Push the button. On.
Oh, I thought the red was on. Oh, all right. My bad. I turned it off. All right. Let's start over. I will call to order this meeting of the Village of Germantown Board of Zoning Appeals. This meeting has been given public notice in accordance with Section 19.83 and 1984 of the Wisconsin statutes, in such form that it will apprise the general public and news media of the subject matter that is intended for consideration and action. Or Madam Clerk would call the roll, please.
Okay, Barry White,
Here.
Christine Huber,
Here.
Jeff Knapp. Your quorum is present.
Thanks. You guys should all turn on your mics too when necessary. All right. Our first item of business is the approval of the minutes. Did everyone have a chance to review our June 15, 2021 minutes?
I did. I do have some changes.
Okay. What are those?
So first off, my name is misspelled in wrote here. It's Huber, not Hubner. Hubner and
okay. Yeah.
And then on the second page, it's the first paragraph that starts with Huber. I don't think that really is what I had said. I think it should read that Huber commented that it's not for preservation enjoyment because there are many RS5 lots in the village that you could not put a pool on. I think you need to change the word enough to many and insert the word not after the word could. Otherwise, it's not really conveying what my point was.
Yeah, I don't have a specific recollection of what you said, but that does make sense. All right, anything else? Well, in that case, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as corrected by Ms. Huber.
Second it?
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, the motion to approve the minutes as corrected is approved. Our next item of business is a public hearing, deliberation, and action. The purpose of this hearing will be to hear any and all parties, their attorneys or agents, for or against a variance appeal filed by Lutheran Church of Living Christ, W156N10660 Pilgrim Road, with Barry Landowski, the property agent, who is requesting a variance from section 17.46, paren 7, paren small c of the Village Zoning Code to reduce the minimum property line setback from 5 feet to 0 feet. Also requesting a variance from section 17.46, paren 7, paren little h, paren 2, to allow the sign to be located closer than 150 feet to a residential zoning district boundary, and requesting a variance from section 17.46, paren 7, paren small h, paren 5, to allow an electronic message center component of a ground sign to exceed 40% of the total sign area. Is Mr. Landowski present? All right, Mr. Landowski, this is your appeal. So it's entirely up to you how we proceed. Typically, what we have found makes the most sense is to have our zoning administrator go first and sort of explain what the zoning rules are, and they usually have a nice PowerPoint presentation that shows the property, and she can explain what the objection is or what the nonconformity is, and then you can explain to us the basis for your appeal. We've found that works, but like I say, it's your case, so it's entirely up to you how you want to proceed. Okay. In that case, I will turn to Ms. Zant, and you will step up to the podium. Let me swear you in first. You'll raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
All right. Will you state your name for our record, please?
My name is Emily Zant. I'm the village associate village planner and
zoning administrator.
Okay, thank you.
I'll start with just some background about this application. A sign review application was submitted on March 30th of 2020 for Lutheran Church of Living Christ to add an electronic message board to the existing monument sign on the property located at W156 and 10660 Pilgrim Road. On June 5th, Planning and Zoning staff emailed a letter to the applicant that included staff review comments concerning items that needed to be addressed prior to the sign going before the Plan Commission for review and approval. However, the electronic message board had already been installed in the existing ground or monument sign. Following this communication and further communication between the applicant and Planning and Zoning staff, it was determined that variance requests and approvals for several code sections would be required to allow the electronic message board to remain in place. A variance request was submitted to the Office of the Clerk Treasurer on July 1st of 2021. So the applicant is requesting 3 variants, which includes a variance from section 17.467C of the Village's zoning code to reduce the minimum setback from the property line from 5 to 0 feet for the ground sign. A variance from section 17.467H2 to allow the sign to be located closer than 150 feet to a residential zoning district boundary. And a variance from 17.467H5 to allow an electronic message center component of a ground sign to exceed 40% of the total sign area. The subject property is located on the east side of Pilgrim Road, approximately 1/3 of a mile north of Donjas Bay Road. It's highlighted in yellow on your screen. This is a zoomed in aerial image of the property. And this is looking at the location of the sign in question before you today. This is an aerial image showing the location of the sign in relationship to the road right-of-way, which is identified by the yellow dashed line on the screen. The road right-of-way line and the front property line is set back from the edge of the road pavement approximately 25 feet. This slide shows a street view heading north on Pilgrim Road. You can see that the base of the sign and you can see the sign base and the previously existing sign cabinet on the right-hand side of the screen. This is a sign rendering provided by the applicant showing the new electronic message center and the new cabinet for said sign. This is another image provided by the applicant. This is a photograph looking to the north at the modified sign from Pilgrim Road, and then looking to the south of the modified sign. So the first variance request is from section 17.467C, which indicates there's a minimum setback from the property line of 5 feet. Although there was no survey provided with the application documents, Washington County GIS and aerial imagery show that the sign base is approximately 2 feet from the Pilgrim Road right-of-way. As the minimum setback from the property line is 5 feet, the existing monument and ground sign is non-conforming with respect to the setback. A non-conforming sign is permitted to remain as is, as long as it is not modified. Section 17.467H3 prohibits installing an electronic message board on a non-conforming sign. Further, although we do not have measurements of the previous sign cabinet, the new sign cabinet appears to be slightly larger than the sign cabinet it replaced. Chapter 17.4613 deems that all pre-existing signs that do not meet setback requirements are non-conforming and only allow a sign face to be replaced if it is the same or nearly identical sign. Chapter 17.48 of the code also prohibits the enlargement of said non-conforming structure. So therefore, a reduction in the minimum setback from 5 to 2 feet, or to 0 feet, as is requested with this variance, would eliminate the non-conforming status of the existing sign structure and, as a consequence, allow the larger sign cabinet and an electronic message board to be installed. The second variance request is for a variance from section 17.467H2, which would allow the electronic message board within 150 feet of a residential zoning district, or to be located in such a place that creates a negative impact on residential property. This section of the code was written to prohibit electronic message boards within 150 feet of residential district, or to prohibit an electronic message board further than 150 feet from a residential use if it is deemed by the Plan Commission to create a negative impact on existing residential uses. The subject property here is in blue on the screen. It's zoned I institutional, and you can see there's a residential zoning district to the north as R1 single family residential district, and a residential district to the west across Pilgrim Road, which is the RS6 single family residential district. Based on the sign location and where the electronic message board will be located on the sign, using aerial imagery and the county's GIS system, I measured approximately 117.5 feet from the nearest residential district. The variance request number 3 is from section 17.467H5, which limits the size of the electronic message board to 40% of the overall size of the sign. As shown in the rendering from the sign company, the size of the cabinet is 8 feet or 96 inches by 5 feet 4 inches or 64 inches. Per staff's measurements of the electronic message board earlier today, the electronic message board is 8 feet by 2 feet 8 inches or 32 inches, which is 50% of the total sign area. This exceeds the maximum of 40% permitted. So if the Board of Zoning Appeals grants any 1, 2, or all 3 of the variants requested, the proposed monument sign will still require Plan Commission review and approval prior to completing installation of the new monument sign. If all 3 variances are granted, then the church can install the already purchased sign on the existing masonry base subject to review and approval by the Plan Commission. At that time, the church will have to show that the new sign, specifically all of the electronic sign components, meets the requirements of under section 17.467H. If only 1 or 2, but not all 3 variances are granted, then the church will have to revise 1 or more aspects of the proposed new sign. For example, move the masonry base location or reduce the size of the electronic message sender component prior to resubmitting their sign application for the Plan Commission review approval and still meet all the requirements for the electronic message center under 17.467H. That's what I have for you.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions for you. What I'd like to talk specifically about each of the 3 requirements for which a variance is sought, and I'd like to talk about, or at least get your thoughts on the rationale for those restrictions, starting with the first one that they're seeking a variance about, how the monument sign must be at least 5 feet from the property line. What's the thinking there? What's the justification for that restriction?
Sure, I would say the justification for that restriction is primarily setback from the road right of way so that a sign doesn't impede vision. I would say that's the primary reason. Also, to be able to maintain the space between the sign and the property line or the road right of way line.
Is there always this much setback distance between the road right of way and the actual road? I think not. My property comes very, very close to my road.
Yeah, I would say not.
Okay.
No, that's not always the case.
Okay, and here we have roughly 25 feet, I think you said, and we see we've got grass and trees, so you're not got snow plows, at least not intentionally plowing anything in the right of way. So it's sat back further from the road than would be on many streets that didn't have a 25-foot setback from the road to the property line.
Correct.
Okay. Let's talk about the second one, which is the 150 feet from another zoning boundary. What's the rationale for that?
Sure. So these electronic message signs can often cause light issues or can be a nuisance to residential districts. Without limiting, our code does limit some of the brightness of the signs, but sometimes during nights, some of that the light can shine into residential districts and into homes.
And so the thought was that if it's at least 150 feet away, then it probably wouldn't bother an adjoining neighbor, right?
Correct. That's the intent.
And in this case, although the boundary line is 117 feet away, there are no real houses that are less than 150 feet away, correct?
I might have to measure that. It seems like the houses would be about 150
About
feet away.
150. And those houses, the one house in particular where you've got your arrow drawn, that is going to be parallel to the sign, right? The light of the sign is going to shine north and south on Pilgrim, not west across Pilgrim into the backyard of that house that's on Cobbler, right?
Correct. If it is actually straight across
Yeah.
from it, yes.
But if I may, just to be clear, the rule is 150 feet from a residential district, not from a house.
Right.
Correct. Yep.
Yep. And the last one on the percentage of the sign that can be covered by the electronic message board. What's the rationale for that?
I believe the village introduced electronic message boards to the code in 2014 and put in this not to exceed 40% rule in order to keep the size of electronic message boards to a minimum. Really have them be supplemental to the monument signs rather than be the entire monument.
But the rest of the monument isn't included in the measurement, right?
Correct.
If you put a much bigger case around this electronic sign and actually made the electronic sign larger, but more of it just black plastic, giant black plastic frame to get the percentage down below 40%, would that meet the requirement?
You may be able to do that up to the point where the sign meets the maximum area for that sign in that district. The Plan Commission does review all monument signs, all electronic message centers, so they will be looking for some of those aesthetic items.
Okay. Else have any questions for Ms. Ames?
Just one question. After your introduction of the 3 variance requests, you have 3 different paragraphs that address specific ordinances within the code. Could you go back to those? The middle one that says that actually it was after you had shown all of the other slides. I'll ask you to stop when it's up. That one there.
Yep.
Go back. The middle one says, if all 3 variances are granted, then the church can install the already purchased sign on the existing masonry base, subject to review and approval by the Plan Commission. At that time, the church will have to show the new sign Specifically, the electronic component meets all of the requirements under 1746(7H. But if we grant a variance for that, we are then allowing the applicant to surpass that ordinance, are we not?
So, portions of it. So the request, the variance request has two sections, of that, or two portions of that section, or two, numbers. So you would, so the variance request is for, to, not meet the requirements of, number 2 and number 5. They would have to meet the requirements of the remainder.
Okay, I do understand that now. But it's already been determined that that the applicant is not requesting a variance for the other subsections of that ordinance, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Landowski, you're up. You too will. We solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Will you state your name and address for our record, please?
Barry Landowski, N106, W15749, Adams Court, Germantown. President and the treasurer of the church.
Well, welcome.
Thanks. First, I'll just talk about, church was built in 1967. Just a short time after that, we erected a sign, 3x9 tower, an 8x9 platform with a 5x8 lighted case, housing channels, individual vinyl letters, made out of stone, put in the place where it is right now. Now, back in 1967, Germantown had a population of approximately 5,000 people. Pilgrim Road was a lightly traveled 2-lane road with a gravel shoulder. Mainly used to go to Menominee Falls. It had no curb and gutter. Since that time, Germantown has quadrupled in size. Pilgrim Road has become a 4-lane main thoroughfare back and forth in and out of Germantown. Virtually everything in Germantown has changed, except for our sign. Our sign is in the same place that it was 50 years ago. It hasn't moved, it's still there. It looks virtually the same as it did. In 2019, our church decided that we had sold the parsonage. We decided we needed to upgrade some things. The sign was the first thing we looked at because, as you can see, it's outdated. It's in order to change any message, someone had to go down by the sign with a bucket of letters and pull all the ones out, put all the new ones in, and go around to the other side and do the same thing. It's especially a hardship in the wintertime. So consequently, a lot of the messages, a lot of the times and dates didn't get changed. Christmas services, we'd put up a banner rather than try to change that sign. So we decided to invest in a modern sign, move into the 21st century, and get a sign where we could change the dates, change the times, change the messages in the office, which is our plan. Congregation was surprised and shocked to discover that we had actually 5 code violations. So that's why we're here. 2 of the non-compliance we were able to handle directly. One was landscaping around the sign. You can see it looks bad. It's not good. Well, the church council just recently approved a proposal from Wendland Nursery, which will totally rip out all the other shrubbery, put in all new shrubberies and about 2 dozen perennials with mulch. We've also That'll happen shortly. We've also procured new letters because our letters were 2 inches, and now the code says they have to be 5 inches. So we have procured new letters that are 5 inches. Put those up. They'll be in next week. The items that we're requesting a variance on, maximum setback. As I stated earlier, the sign has been there for 50 years, over. I guess the code didn't always say you had to have a 5-foot setback. We've got a 2-foot setback. It was suggested that we move the sign 3 feet or 5 feet. Well, that's not going to happen. It's stone. The only way to move it would be to demolish it, which would be a travesty, I think, and build a new one. I would arguably say that we have one of the finest looking signs in Germantown. Better once we get it fixed up. Class, it has character with a touch of German motif. I think it would be totally irresponsible to destroy it for 3 feet. We're asking a variance on that. Second variance we're asking for is we're within 150 feet of residential zoning. The nearest house is about 160 feet or 175 feet away from the sign. I did have pictures, and I don't know if you got those, but the view from the houses across the street is this, and I brought some. We can. So this is the view that the people across the street have of the sign. Can't see it. I mean, you can't see what's going on. It's couldn't tell if it's the same as it was before. So our contention is that this is not going to it's not going to keep anybody up at night. It's not going to bother anyone. It certainly won't create any sort of a hardship for people across the street. We're asking a variance on that also. Third variant we're looking for is display shall not exceed 40% of the sign. Now, as Emily mentioned, the sign is, we just took 5 foot by 8. It was too hard to figure out the additional 4 inches, which comes to 5760 square inches. Now, the bottom half is the electronic portion. Of the bottom half, there's a border. Like most things, you don't print edge to edge. There's a border, so top and bottom, the highest message that it can be is 25.2 inches. On the sides, there's about a 3-inch to 6-inch border, giving it down to a 88 inches. So you've got 3 inches and 3 inches, or 6 inches, down to 88 inches. So the total square footage of the sign of the electronic display is 2,218 square inches, or 39.5% of the sign. So I would ask for consideration that that be approved. I think that the sign is not going to be a nuisance to anyone. It's 36 feet from the road, certainly not in danger of being hit by a car or a snowplow or anything. Quite the opposite. I think people have asked me when we're going to get the sign hooked up. If you drive by there at night, it's very dark on that side of the road. People have asked that it would be nice to have some light there. When is your sign going to be hooked up? It's up to the village, kind of. The church also houses several different groups, like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, AA meetings. Currently, the summer home for the Germantown Kids Club. It would certainly be nice to sign as a vehicle for communicating messages to the parents about changes or upcoming events or things that are going on. I think it would be certainly an advantage to all of Germantown to be able to have this. And I don't see that it's not going to hurt anybody's feelings if we are granted the variance. I don't think the neighbors would even know anything about the variance because we're not that close. Sign won't affect anybody. And we will use the sign in a professional manner, not turn it into a Las Vegas light show or anything. We want it for a vehicle of communicating church events, messages, and change of times, like we did with the other sign, except now we don't want to go down, change each individual. Oh, it's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Now, before you go.
Yeah.
Things that I'm perhaps a little troubled by is your calculation that the sign only comprises 39.5%.
38.5.
38.5 total area. And the reason that I'm a little troubled by that is if you're right about that, then you don't need a variance.
That's my point.
But but if you withdraw that request for a variance, the administrator says that no, you've calculated it wrong. There's a different way to do the calculation. Then you've got a different appeal that you have to file of the administrator's decision. And so I just want to be clear what it is that your preferred. I suppose maybe you're better. Well, I don't want to. You tell me what you want to do.
I just want it to be approved.
Right.
I mean, whatever is the best way to do that.
Well, so maybe, so since you have sought a variance, maybe the thing that makes sense will proceed and decide about your variance. If for some reason that variance were to be denied, you can still make your pitch to the zoning administrator that your calculation is correct and that you don't need a variance. You comply, and if they say no, that you can't convince them of that, then there's a different process that allows you to argue about your calculation. But that's probably the most efficient way for you to go tonight.
Okay, my calculation did not include 4 inches on the bottom, which adds square inches, so that would bring it down to 37.
In all the years that you've been connected with the church, has anybody complained about the sign being too close, or has anybody run their car into the sign?
Complained the sign was too close to the road, changed the letters, and they wanted.
All right.
From the document you sent us,
What happened is when we got the sign delivered, we didn't know where to put it, and we didn't have the capabilities of putting it, so our property chairman at the time said, well, let's just put it in the stand, take the other one down, put it in the stand, but it hasn't been connected. We contacted Buto Lighting, and they said, oh, you got to get a permit first, so we didn't even know we had to get a permit. So that's what that is. It's not connected. It's sitting there. In fact, I think it's still got plastic wrapped around.
I do have a question for Ms. actually. So you alluded to the fact that there are other regulations in Germantown related to electronic signs. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, because I think there would be a concern about the brightness. Even if you have a sign that has scrolling letters and blinking letters, that's certainly a little more obnoxious to the passerby. And I assume we have some kind of codes and regulations for that.
Yes, we do. I can just go through and kind of summarize the regulations for the electronic message boards, if that works for you.
That would be
Okay.
great.
There are certain districts that electronic message boards are allowed in, including the B1, B2, B3, B4, B5, I, and M1 and M2 zoning districts. There are exceptions to that. The second criteria is that electronic message boards shall not be located within 150 feet of a residential zoning district boundary. Number 3 is the electronic message boards may be installed as part of an existing monument or ground sign, which is in compliance with all applicable requirements of the chapter and other requirements of the law. No electronic message board may be installed on otherwise made part of a non-conforming sign. Number 4 is that electronic message boards shall only display static messages. Messages shall not contain animation, effects, stimulating animation, or video. Messages shall not contain text or images that dissolve, fade, scroll, travel, flash, spin, revolve, shake, or include any other type of movement or motion during the message interval. The message interval shall not be less than 7 seconds before the transition, and the transition interval, the maximum amount of time allowed to transition from one message to the next, which may include fading, dissolving, or traveling, but shall not exceed 3 seconds. The sign area or display face of the message board shall be included in the calculation of the sign area, but shall not exceed 40% of the total sign area. The electronic message board shall be equipped with a sensor or other device that is programmed to automatically determine the ambient light level and adjust or dim the message board light to a level not to exceed a maximum brightness of 0.3 foot candles above ambient light conditions during both daylight hours and nighttime hours. The electronic message board shall be programmed or set in such a manner that the display face will turn dark and emit no light in the case of a malfunction. And then finally, the owner of the property upon which the ground sign containing signage is responsible for keeping up-to-date information in an electronic message. Sorry. They're responsible for keeping message board content up to date and knowing the and having information for if the message board needs to something needs to be changed or changed in terms of the programming with the message board. We need that information for someone to contact.
Okay, so I heard that static messages only are allowed.
Correct.
So that would mean like no scrolling messages, nothing blinking.
Correct. Yep.
You said something about fading or traveling. I wasn't quite.
Yeah. So when the message is on the electronic message board, there can't be any, let's see, text that dissolves, fades, scrolls, travels, spins, flashes, revolves, shakes, or moves. There is up to 3 seconds in between messages when the transition takes place, that there can be some sort of movement such as fading, dissolving, or traveling, but that can exceed 3 seconds.
Okay.
And those are, if we grant the variance, those are the other requirements that the Plan Commission will have to ensure this sign complies with.
Correct.
Able to do stuff like that.
I'm correct, right, Ms. Ann?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else? And we'll come back one more time before we. All right. I understand that there was a written comment submitted, which I would like to read. This is from George and Janine Coleas, Koleas, at W156N10640 Cobbler Lane, in Germantown. It's regarding this appeal. And their letter says, "My wife and I plan to attend the public hearing on the above date. We wish to make the, oh, are Mr. or Mrs. Coleus here? Oh, should I read your letter, or you want to just come and tell us?" Well, we'll do both. You took the time to type it. So so let me, before we do, because it looks like you have some concerns about the sign. Typically, what I do is I ask for who wants to speak in favor of the requested variance, who wants to speak opposed to it, who wants to be heard, even if they're not necessarily opposed or in favor. Which category would you like to be in? Let's do this. Let's bring you up here. I got to swear you in, and then we can give you a microphone so that anybody who's watching online can hear. So we've now moved to the public comment portion of the hearing. And if you would raise your right hand, you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
All right, will you state your name and address for the record, please?
George Coleus at West 156 North 10640, Cobbler Lane, Germantown, 53022-4107.
Thank you, and welcome, and tell us what you would like us to know.
Okay. Well, I received the letter that was sent to residents announcing this meeting. And having had read it, I also looked up history of what happened. Sign. And it appears that, and this has been mentioned already, that the sign was actually put up before the variances approved. So, and that's what brings us here. I also submitted, well, I submitted in this, there's a picture of the, and actually it was on the map. House being across the street from. Go back one. It's actually pretty, where the sign actually has the arrow on. Bottom.
Yep.
We have a diagonal view of the sign in the letter that we submitted. During installation and testing of the sign, there were times when they were making adjustments that the sign could be extremely bright. So much so that it was clearly visible through our bedroom window with the blinds closed. So that's pretty bright. And that may have been an abomination that something doesn't happen like that all the time. It may have been a one-off thing, but obviously it makes a concern. So first, we ask that the illumination be set at an appropriate level for the residential area that we're in. So whatever the ordinance is to that regard, just that be followed. Second, we ask that a timer be set so that the message sign be turned off at 10 o'clock at night. Okay, we think that's reasonable, given it being a residential area. And it can come again, it can come back on at 8 a.m. That seems reasonable to us as well. Neither of these requests should diminish the sign's effectiveness or utility to the church. These requests are within the village ordinances and face reasonable. Thank you for your consideration, considering those two requests.
Anyone have any questions? So, Ms. Zant, let me ask you, is there any ordinance that prohibits signs, these electronic signs from being on at night?
No, there is not.
Okay, the prohibition is just that it can't be lighter than 0.3 foot candles above the ambient light, regardless of whether it's daytime or nighttime.
Correct.
All right. So then I think that Plan Commission is responsible. We don't have authority on that issue. And so the Plan Commission's responsible for making sure that the sign is no brighter than the ordinances permit. But the ordinances do permit at that low level, 0.3 foot candles above nighttime light, that the sign can be on at night. So Mr. Landowski, let me ask you this. Do you intend to run the sign all night? Thought about it? All right.
If you could
Oh,
come to the
sorry. Yep,
microphone.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
If you'll come up to the microphone, we have people that watch online with these public meetings, we have to broadcast them, and I always forget. Go ahead.
I've sworn me.
Nah, you're still under oath.
Yeah, okay. What happened was, the guy who mows the lawn said, oh, let's plug this baby in and see what it does. So he plugged it in. No thought given to adjusting the illumination, nothing. I don't even know what it said. It might have said welcome, and I don't know, flashing. But it was totally unauthorized to plug it in. He just said, oh, let's plug it in and see what it does. And he plugged it in, and it probably came on the brightest it could come up. I would be strongly opposed to having the sign not on at 7 in the morning, 7:30 in the morning when people are going by. And that's when we can get the messages to the parents about kids clubs, something like that, or an AA meeting or Boy Scouts. So I don't have problems not running it. Certainly don't.
I don't think we have the power to put
No,
that
I think not.
restriction on him.
No. If he was going to say, oh, we didn't intend to run it at night, then I would interpret Mr. Colias's comment as not adverse to the sign. But since we don't have the authority to tell him not to run it at night, and he's not sure if he's going to run it at night, he's not sure how bright it will be when you see it, and you're not sure how bright it'll be either. So I'm going to interpret your comment as having spoken against the variance, unless you think that's incorrect.
I mean, I live a half a block from you, so you can tell me what you think. If it's too bright, we can certainly dumb it down.
Sure.
Our letter is not meant to object to what the church is doing. The only accommodation that we're asking for, well, actually, we're diagonal. So if you're right on facing the edge, well, yeah, you wouldn't see anything. But we're diagonal, so we get kind of the full effect that we can from that distance. So we think these two requests of ours are reasonable on their face and could easily be met. As to the light starting up at 7 a.m., it's at the 10 o'clock one would be our concern. It's 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah,
That'd be the main
we
thing.
just don't have the village ordinances say what they say, and we don't have the ability to impose additional regulations on property owners. All we can do is say that they can have a variance from certain, and so where that leaves us is that if the variances are granted and the signs installed, the ordinances do provide how bright how the sign can be. Hopefully the village board got that right when they set that, that level. Hopefully it won't bother you or anyone else. And then as far as any turning it off at night, that's just something you'd have to work out with the church directly, or if it became a nuisance, that's another issue you could raise with the village. But it's just not something that, that we can impose as part of
Well,
the
and,
variance.
and as I mentioned in my comment, when they were, whatever they were doing that caused the sign to come on, I don't know if illumination was a one-off thing or it's going to be like that, all the time. It wasn't on for a really long period of time, but with this meeting coming up, we wanted to put down, well, what would
Yeah.
we ask for? Was we're not opposing the more modern sign, just the illumination and the hours. That's
Yep.
the only thing we question, and we'd hope that the church would have that consideration for the people that live across the street. That's pretty much all we're saying. So we do not officially oppose the sign and say, oh, no, it's got to be taken. That was not our purpose.
The record, Mr. Landowski just said the church wants to be a good neighbor. All right, thank you for your comments. We appreciate them and we will consider them. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the requested variance? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the requested variances? Well, then would you like to say something that's not in favor or not against? Because that's my third category. We can, yeah, well, we can take your microphone. Yep. And first you got to raise your right hand. Solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. And please state your name and address.
W17053 Ava Circle, Germantown.
Thank you. If you would tell us again, just so that we have it on our record.
Okay, I just wanted to say that it'd be a true hardship for us if we really had to move this sign. It's not going to be the easiest thing to demolish that and start all over. And we're a small church. We don't have a lot of money, and we've got a lot of older people in our church, and we're trying to keep everything together. So we just hope that this will go, that's passed through, and we would appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Anyone else have any comments that they would like to make? All right, what I will do now is I'm going to go back and see if anybody has any questions for Ms. Zant. Oh, is there anybody online that wants to be heard? Okay. All right. If the person online wants to make a comment, please indicate somehow. All right, anyone else have any more questions for Ms. Zant?
Just one thought that just popped into my head. Immediately south of this property, I believe you showed that it was zoned agricultural at the present moment, but presumably at some point that will be developed.
Yes, that it is possible. I would say that there are quite a few. It's a pretty wet area, so to the extent that development could take place of this property, yes, it could be developed. Yeah,
I mean, we have seen development in well.
correct. Yep.
Well, I mean, that's something to.
Anything else for Mr. Landowski? All right, Mr. Landowski, this is, well, Ms. Zant, you don't have anything more, do you? Anything you want to tell us? Okay, Mr. Landowski, the way this works is that before we begin our deliberations, I close the hearing, and once I close the hearing, the evidence has been submitted, and that's what we make our decision based on. So if you want to tell us anything else, this is your time to do it, because I'm going to close the hearing when you're done. Okay. All right, then I'll declare the hearing closed, and we will begin our deliberations. I think what makes the most sense is to go through them one at a time, because there are three. I just think that, so let's first talk about the variance request for 2 or 0 feet. The actual request is 0 feet from the property line as opposed to the required 5 feet. Issue we always address is whether it will be, whether that variance would or would not be contrary to the public interest, or would not be in accord with the spirit of the zoning code.
So I don't think that would be contrary to the public interest, especially because of the 25-foot buffer.
Yeah, I totally
exists.
agree with that. I think that, but for that 25-foot buffer, there might be, a sign might be within 5 feet of the road. Or
Right.
27 feet or 30 or whatever it was. So yeah, I think it's consistent with the zone. Thoughts? Or are you good?
I think I agree with the two of you that 3 feet that we're talking about does not conform to the current land use ordinances. It is so minimal that I don't think it achieves that contrariness, if you will, to the public interest.
Second consideration on this particular variance is whether there are or are not exceptional, extraordinary, or unusual conditions or circumstances that apply specifically to this lot, parcel, use, structure, or intended use that do not apply generally to other property or uses in the same district.
I think that 25-foot buffer, again, could be an condition on this parcel.
Yeah, I agree. I think also in other cases, I mean, we deem structure to be part of the property. And so because this monument is already there, where it is, that to me makes it unique as well. So I think those two things don't apply everywhere.
I think a couple other things that are exceptional about this situation is that the church, and it hasn't been mentioned in conversation here tonight, but just from my being, church is set off quite a bit from the road. It's well off the road itself. The monument obviously is closer to the road. And then the other exceptional portion of this is that it's, unless there are some exceptions that I'm not aware of, it's the backyards of the residences on the east side or the west side of Pilgrim Road that is the church. Still a concern, obviously. It's not the front yard, it's someone looking out their front window and perhaps seeing the sign on the regular. So to summarize, I think there are some exceptional or extraordinary conditions regarding this issue.
Our third consideration is whether it's necessary for preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights possessed by others. I guess that is a question of whether, good signage is a substantial property right. And I think I'm prepared to say it is, that for a church is technically a commercial enterprise, but it needs people to know it's there and to it. So I would say that is a substantial. I think a sign is important.
Yeah, and I agree. Just, they already have the sign to be able to up your property. It's a property right.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a good point.
I would agree as well.
Next consideration is whether it will or will not create a substantial detriment to adjacent property, be contrary to public safety or interest. To me, is all a function of whether the 0.3 candles is, it's not a hazard to anybody. It's a question of whether, that's not within purview. That's already been set by somebody else. Assume that.
I mean, and that's not being what we're talking
No,
about here.
right, no, that's a good point. Yeah. So no, the fact that very good point. The fact that it's 3 feet closer to the road than it otherwise would be doesn't have any impact on anybody. Yeah, okay. Fifth consideration is whether a literal enforcement in terms of the zoning code would or would not result in practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship to the applicant. Sign and yeah, they can't really use they can't use their monument, and it is a nice monument. That practical difficulty and undue hardship is tearing that thing down and building something lesser. All right.
If I could just make a comment on
Please.
that. My biggest concern is that whether it was surmising how something like this maybe works its way through church administration. Somehow it appears to me that at some point at an earlier time period in the planning for replacing the sign and replacing it with an electronic sign, the village should have been consulted. We agreed to do this. What are some of the requirements that we have to follow? Permits do we need? Approval by the village? And it seems as though to a certain extent, whether it be poor communication or whatever within the church, it created their own hardship in a way.
Now, do remember, though, that on this particular variance, we're just talking about moving it, allowing them to be too close to the street. And so this is really an issue more with the monument, and they could have replaced their existing sign with a substantially identical sign. So I think we're certainly going to get to your issue in number 2 and number 3, but I think your point is very well taken.
I see what you're saying.
But I think it'll come up in number 2 or 3.
Thank you.
All right. Those circumstances, I will make a motion that we grant the first requested variance. That is a variance from section 17.467C to reduce the village zoning, to reduce the minimum property line setback from 5 feet to 0 feet.
Seconded.
Madam Clerk, if you'd call the roll. Aye.
Barry White,
Aye.
Christine Huber,
Aye.
Jeff Knapp,
Aye.
All right. First variance is granted. On to the second one. That is to allow sign to be closer than 150 feet to a residential zoning district boundary. There would be 117 or so feet. Go back through these same considerations. The first one is whether the variance will or will not be contrary to the public interest, will not be in accordance with the spirit of the zoning code.
My estimation, the spirit of the code is to create some type of separation between a lighted sign and residential areas, and I think the unique configuration of this area still does, despite the fact that it's not 100.
Agree with that. I think that that although the boundary of the zoning district is 117 feet, have any houses that are 17 feet. All of the houses are more than appear to be at least around 150. So I do think it's. I agree with you. The spirit is fulfilled. Right on top of that.
Well, I guess I would disagree with that, because I think the spirit of the code is to just, be sure that we don't have electronic signs within 150 feet of a residential district. And, as, some of the concerns expressed by the gentleman who spoke tonight, people do not want light shining in residential areas. So I think it's very hard to say that granting this variance would be in accord with the spirit of the zoning code. I don't think it's for us to rewrite 50 feet to the house, not 150 feet to the boundary of the residential district. We're not here to reinterpret and rewrite the zoning code. The spirit of the code is to make sure that in residential areas, people, living their lives aren't subject to light that they don't want to have shining in their windows. And I think it also, can impact people, driving by as well. In a generally residential area, people don't want bright signs flashing at them as they're. So, I just think it's very hard to say that variance would be in accord with the spirit of the zoning.
See how the other ones pan out, and then we'll vote on it. 2, whether there are or are not exceptional, extraordinary conditions or circumstances that apply specifically to this lot, parcel use, structure, or intended use that do not apply generally to other property or uses in the same district. Thinking is, like we said, with the monument, by your happenstance or layout of all these properties such that houses are separated distance that your point that we don't, right, but what's unique about this property is that all the other houses nearby are farther away. Assists. I think that makes it unique. Tied to the monument.
Yeah, I just rewriting the code. It's 150 feet, and heard from the gentleman who lives on the southwest angle from the sign, but there's obviously also a house to the northwest angle and be future development in the area. And I don't see anything exceptional or unique at this variance cited as additional variance.
Not sure exactly how to interpret by other properties in the same district. Church property is identified as excuse me, institutional. Their property is the only institutional property there. But I am aware of other churches in the village that have similar type of electric signs. So I'm extending it to, does this church deserve the same right to have a sign similar to other churches in the village? For that reason, I would say that I think the variance is necessary for the preservation of those rights.
Jumped ahead to,
Sorry.
2 is the usual conditions. But on the monument, you were the one that pointed out the layout of the.
Mhm.
So that's the one we're still on 2, whether there's
Okay.
something
Excuse me.
on that one.
I think my thinking on that is the same as for the first variance that we considered, that there are exceptional and extraordinary conditions here, just because of the layout across the street and the sign situated at a distance, although not
Here, you can start on number 3.
Just repeat what I said before, that the church, believe that the variance is necessary to preserve the same rights and enjoyment of a sign such as this that other churches in the village possess.
Yeah, I think when it says the same district, I don't know that it literally means that district that this church is in. I think it means the institutional things that are zoned I.
I guess I just struggle with that because there could be institutional properties that are completely surrounded by agricultural. So of course, then, this ordinance wouldn't apply to them. I don't think to then say, well, I guess shouldn't thrown out that. Because otherwise, every time it applies, you'd be throwing it out,
Further will not create substantial detriment to adjacent property, contrary to public safety or.
No, I mean, I think it could be argued that it will, contrary to the public interest. We have these ordinances. Light pollution is a serious concern. It's actually a growing concern. LED signs have become much more inexpensive over the years, and everyone's converting their, older style signs to LED. Suddenly everything's lit up that, used to have a more subtle appeal to it. So, I think it is not something to be taken lightly. Granting variances related to electronic signs, because as we've seen in the past, often then it's cited as a reason why the next person should get variance.
We'll have to make sure that it village board in enacting ordinances has decided acceptable.
Right, it just seems that sometimes we seem to fall into deciding that these ordinances really needed, so we should grant a variance to them. I don't think that's the purpose of
Yep.
this body.
No,
I think that there's a chance that the variance could create a substantial detriment to the neighbors. Specifically, as described here, the people that are at an angle to the sign and block portion of the sign configuration wouldn't necessarily block homes. It's difficult for me to picture, if you will, how bright that sign will be at 117 or more feet. One question I just popped into my head too is that we saw a measurement of 117.5 feet from property line to property line across Pilgrim Road. We don't know what that measurement would be for the old residences, if you will. Just the adjacent residences on the immediately to the north and south of the property adjacent to the sign, or would it be in conformity with the second residence to the north and to the south?
well, and this goes to her point. We're not the houses. We're measuring. Closest boundary is 117 feet. But see, that's why I go back to say, well, yeah, but the village board, when they picked 150, they in some situations you're going to have a house that's set back maybe only 5 feet from the or 10 feet from the district boundary. And so the village board, when they said 150 feet, we're thinking, well, we're never going to really have a sign closer than, we don't want a sign closer than roughly 100. You might have a house right up on top of that, but here I don't think we are 150 feet, and that's why I'm prepared to to say that this variance would be acceptable. Now, remember one other thing, that if this boundary happened to be at 150 feet right here, then they wouldn't be asking for this variance and talking about substantial detriment. They'd be compliant. So, I don't know, it's reasonable minds can disagree. I don't take any issue with.
I think I would just like to add that the gentleman who spoke tonight has been incredibly gracious and,
Yeah.
trying to work with the church and saying it would be okay as long as it's not too bright and work on what hours it's on. But, we haven't heard from the person who's northwest angle. This gentleman, they may sell their home at some point to another individual who would have a different view of it. Property to the south could be developed. So, it shouldn't fall on a resident to have to go and work with the property owner on how bright their sign's going to be, what hours it's going to be on. That's what we have codes for, to protect our residents from having to get involved in that type of thing. I just want to be sure, we do have to look out for the people who
Oh, sure.
weren't here to
Well, and that's
speak about it.
No, right, I do, but I do think the sign is not, says that, it's not exceed maximum brightness of. Can't exceed the maximum. So I don't know, but I think it's Plan Commission make sure that the sign is not so bright. We're right on top of, if the sign was right on top of another district, then I would say, yeah, we can't take that. I think that if 150 feet is what the village board thought was the minimum distance, because they never knew how close a house was going to be to the boundary, and we're exceeding 150 feet at the closest house, I'm trust the Plan Commission to make sure it's not too bright. But that's just me. I don't. You disagree. You think if we don't grant this variance, don't grant any of these variances. Any of these variances that are denied. Right? If we don't, I guess with this one they could move their monument back. All right. A literal enforcement of the terms of the zoning code would or would not result in practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship. My thought on that is the same as it was on the first one, that it would require them to move the monument, and we have historically considered this type of thing structure, and so I would say that that's unnecessary hardship. Structure and rebuild it feet back.
Right, or they could go to a non-electric sign.
They could, yeah, you're right, yeah, definitely
And
could do
just
that.
have a spotlight on it.
Comment on this is what I stated before. Better planning may have a church to come into compliance prior to the purchase of the sign.
And I mean, that's something we've seen before, where people come before the board with kind of a self-created hardship. They, charged ahead and did some understanding of the, I don't know if that's hardship we should be.
Right. They're all good comments. These are not frequently not easy decisions to make. That said, I will go ahead and make a motion to grant the variance from section 17.467 small h to allow the sign to be closer than 150 feet to a residential zoning district boundary. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Clerk, if you'll call the roll.
Barry White,
Aye.
Christine Huber,
Nay.
Jeff Knapp,
Aye.
Variance is granted. Third one. Request to allow message center component to exceed 40% of the total sign area. Consideration whether it will or will not be contrary to the public interest or be in accordance with the spirit of the zone. This is for me, this is kind of a tough one because I'm not entirely clear if we're at 38.5 or 40. I understand. I think the reason for so that the sign isn't so huge. Also understood from the plant that we don't. The fact is, the model really is part of this particular sign. Rendering we have up here that's Exhibit C. The electronic part does not. The entire structure. I don't think it, and I think Plan Commission has, say if it, aesthetics.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the spirit of the zoning code, the aesthetics and the fact that it's on such a large monument base, that was counted toward calculation, it would be much smaller.
Again, I think the larger than allowed, otherwise allowed electronic section of the sign is minimized by of the area. The fact that it is, that the nearest residential area is across the street. Large of those residential areas face the church as opposed. So I feel that the variance will not be.
Well, I think that's, yeah, and that goes to our second consideration. Exceptional, extraordinary, unusual conditions affecting this property. So, even by zoning administrator's calculation, it's not like we're. So then you're right that when your physical layout of this. So I'm say number 2.
I would agree.
Necessary for the present substantial property rights. Thought that sign has to be a big sign. Doesn't mean it.
With this rule.
Right,
So, you can.
I would, if I may, I would make a motion to is necessary to the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property possessed by other property owners in the same district. For previously stated reasons, there are other like businesses, churches that have similar type signs. And I know that the circumstances may be different, obviously situated in different parts of the village. But I think that, again, of this area doesn't overshadow the right of the church to exercise the same rights that other churches do.
Yeah, because I don't think other churches have right to have.
Consistency, 'cause substantial detriment to a property. I think we're uncertain, and at least me, I'm relying on Plan Commission to make sure that it's, I mean, there are nuisance ordinances. Just because we say they can light the sign doesn't mean, just because, saying they can light the sign, what we're saying. Particular zoning requirements that. So so that's, I'm not convinced based on the evidence that we heard, and knowing that the commission limits these to point above ambient. That it's a substantial difference.
I mean, I think that the 0.3-foot candles that was supposed to be 50 feet away from, the.
But I do think it's a maximum.
Supposed to be not, large of a portion. All the components of it working to protect the person from, protect a neighbor from the sign. You need both brightness and the size. You need
Yep.
all of them, not just one of them. For bright, but it's.
Literal enforcement of the terms of zoning code would or would hardship.
Just have to.
Again, what we're just talking about is of it.
Portion of it does.
Well, and from the sounds of it, I mean, maybe.
Let's go back to my statement for the variance, and it's true here as well that I believe there is a hardship, but that the hardship has been self-imposed by not pre-planning for the installation of the sign.
All of them in order to, so I will make the motion to grant variance from section 17.467 small h5 to allow an electronic message center component of a ground sign to exceed 40% of the total sign area. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Made and seconded. The
Nay.
Aye. No, maybe I should make myself clear, right? I don't believe that there is a hardship because the hardship was self-imposed.
There's no hardship.
My opinion on the self-imposed hardship has not changed, is solid. So if I then need to change my,
Well, would it result in practical difficulty? Practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship, I understand. Unnecessary hardship. Practical difficulty that might be different, and then we can.
I guess my feeling is the same, that a practical difficulty, reworking the sign to make the electronic portion smaller, self-imposed for the same reasons I stated.
I'll make the motion and either lacking a second it, and I'll make the motion. So we're gonna not count that previous vote because of irregularity in analysis. And we're gonna vote again. Or now I'm gonna make a new motion. I'm gonna move that we grant the third requested variance from section 17.467, small h5, to allow an electronic message center component of a ground sign to exceed 40% of the total sign area. Second. Motion having failed, get a second, third requested variance denied. Therefore, Mr. Landowski, the first two variances are granted. The third one is not. And so where that leaves you, I think, is either to convince someone that your calculation of the amount of area is correct, and if you persuade them, then you don't need a variance. The other option is to work to do something with the sign in order to make it comply with that 40% requirement. And then your third option is to appeal to the circuit court, and you'll get information in the mail describing how that process works. Okay? That concludes that hearing. Our next order of business is whether we will have another hearing in September.
Right now, I do not have another application. I have not received another application. If we do have a meeting, it would be on September 8th. Normally, the meetings are held on the second Wednesday at 5:30 PM, but I do not have another application on file.
Okay, very good. All right, that concludes our items on the agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
To adjourn?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous consent. We are adjourned.